Hey there, friends and enemies, JoPaWrites here again, and today I wanted to talk about endgame content in Destiny 2, everyone's favorite subject recently, and some reasoning that I feel like Bungie has behind the casualization of Destiny in general and why they make the decisions they do, but also what changes I would love to see made going forward. Now, jumping into it, I want to say first and foremost that I feel like the move to go more casual friendly is definitely planned, is definitely something that Bungie has embraced. It's a game that has gone free to play, even though you do need to buy the expansions and the season passes, all that kind of good stuff. It is free to play. You can just jump in at any time. There's no subscription like in Final Fantasy 14, so you don't really need to pay anything ongoing if you just want to play Crucible or Strikes or whatever the case may be, and just kind of mess around in Destiny 2 content. For that reason, and looking at the numbers of the player base, the percentage of players who do not just raids, because raids are one thing, it's still not a massive percent of players who participate in raids, which is wild to me because I think it's the best activity type in Destiny 2, and I really enjoy them. But they're not for everybody. People can't find groups. People have problems learning the mechanics, whatever the case may be. But then, if you narrow it down even further and you look at the percentage of players who take on Grandmaster Nightfalls, who take on Master Raids, it is so small relative to the entire player base that there's no wonder that better rewards and more time isn't spent with those systems. I think it just comes down to players, and we've seen it with all iterations of from hard mode raids in Destiny 1, prestige raids in early Destiny 2, and even then when they're at their absolute peak, the rewards are good, the player base numbers just do not support Destiny 2 continuing to really cater towards those level of players. It's just a casual, friendly, a casual game. It always has been, contrary to popular belief, and it always will be. There are some modes that I think keep people playing, like raids, like Grandmaster Nightfalls, like trials, all that kind of good stuff. But people come back just because the feel of the game more often than not, rather than any specific activity for the most part. I personally, I really enjoy the story. I like dabbling in this. I like PvP. I like PvE, all that kind of good stuff. And I know I'm not alone in someone who will play a bit of everything and enjoy it. Uh, I like testing new builds, new characters, all that kind of good stuff. Now, there has been an element of power creep, especially with the 3.0 subclass changes. So I do feel like having more difficult content now would be necessary to make builds actually useful again. Because right now you can pretty much be anything with any type of build, and there's no real reason except for in PvP and maybe in Master Raids to have a really cracked build. And that's one unfortunate side effect of all of this that I've been really frustrated with because I do enjoy build crafting, but it's just not necessary for most of the game. Some builds are a lot of fun, even still, even though they're like you can blow through content any way you want. Some builds are just a lot of fun to use, and the synergy is really nice. But other than that, there's really no reason to dive in deep to those. Now, jumping back to the Grandmaster Nightfalls, and people talk about the champions and artificial difficulty. I find that to be crazy. The champions are a mechanic. Yeah, they kind of limit the builds, but I think you can really get by. You could run stasis and freeze things if you want to without using champion mods. You can get by using all like exotics that can take down champions. You can be flexible with either grenades, a grenade mod that takes down stuns champions, or the solar melee that stuns champions. There's still a lot of options in my opinion, and you can kind of build your build around that. So I don't find that to be too crazy. I don't think the development time is worth going too wild for grandmasters, for master raids. I hope they do get improved. Don't get me wrong. I do hope we see some improvement on that. But I wouldn't expect us to go back to the hard mode raids that were a lot of fun, but they didn't get the player numbers that would require a lot of development time. All that time spent because by and large Destiny is, I say casual game, but it's a wide game. There's a lot of stuff and everyone PvP players want more incentives. People want improvements to Gambit or deleted from the game, whatever the case might be. People want solo players to feel rewarded. They want Endgame players to feel rewarded. There's so many different types of players, so many different types of content in Destiny 2. They've got to sprinkle all this out. They've got to have weapons and all the different types of content. They need armor sets. They need cosmetics, all that kind of good stuff across all these different types. And it's just unsustainable for them to go too crazy. We're looking at the first year where we've had a raid or a dungeon every single season, essentially. So that's a lot of stuff. And all those, the raids and the dungeons always get armor and weapons. We get new exotics, all that kind of good stuff. I just don't see, besides maybe like a shader or an emblem, maybe a ghost ship or a ship or a sparrow, all that stuff too, people will use for a little bit and then swap off to something else. And I just don't think it's worth too much crazy extra development time to focus on those end game content and go like, yes, would better rewards incentivize more people to play? Of course. Would adjusting the difficulty, maybe just making it contest mode, I feel like that's the best way forward, is just making the Master Raid contest mode instead of adding additional champions or anything like that. I think personally that's the best case scenario. And then instead of having to add more champions and adjust the design of the encounters, you just maybe take that time and include better rewards. Obviously, Bungie has already talked about fixing adept weapons because right now they feel a little bit useless because of crafting. But again, these systems, everyone wanted crafting in the game, and now there's going to be some growing pains. There's going to be some changes that need to be made over the course of time by Bungie in order to make the system better. Nothing is going to be perfect right off the rip, and by and large, I think that the game is in a solid state. We see it, the third expansion from the third season, excuse me, from the past expansion is the season everyone starts nitpicking in Destiny 2. Everyone gets bored of the game, which makes sense. Go play other things. You know what I'm saying? I've said this a lot on Twitter, but like the first season, everyone's still excited about the new expansion. The second season, it's been led into. There's still that leftover residual excitement. People are still working on builds. We might get some new stuff. But then the third season is when you're far enough from the last expansion and not close enough to the next expansion that I think things feel a little bit stale. And there's only so much content Bungie can put out, and it'll never satisfy everybody. So by and large, I would say now's the perfect time to take a break, dive into the story if you want to, maybe dabble on some things if you're having fun with friends. But take a break. There's so many games coming out in the fall that you definitely should be checking out. And then come back next season, get prepped for Nightfall, and then hopefully there'll be some change. We're getting an Endgame LFG. My hope is that the Endgame LFG actually solves a lot of the problems with the player base numbers being so low for like raids and Grandmasters and stuff. If they are able to implement that well, I think that's going to be an absolute game changer. But those are just some thoughts of mine. I wanted to share that because I feel like there's a lot of this conversation and people who are endgame players being frustrated, understandably, but they got to realize that there's only so much Bungie will do to focus on them when they have such a diverse player base to satisfy. Anyway, my name is JoPa. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. I post a lot of Destiny 2 and other looter shooter content on the channel for sure. I hope you have a good one, and I'll catch you all later.